Imagine being thousands of feet above the ground, locked inside a metal tube soaring across the skies, when suddenly the sound of panic ripples through the cabin. A wealthy CEO known for his untouchable power and distant demeanor collapses in the aisle. But instead of his wealth or his bodyguards saving him, it's an ordinary single father, traveling with his little daughter, who steps in. What follows is not just a fight for survival in the sky, but a moment that alters lives forever in ways no one could have predicted. David Miller wasn't a man who saw himself as a hero. He was a construction worker from Ohio, widowed 3 years earlier when his wife passed away from cancer. Life had not been easy since then. Raising his daughter Emma alone meant juggling long hours, financial strain, and the heavy loneliness that lingered at night when the house fell silent. Still, Emma was his anchor. At 8 years old, she carried her mother's bright eyes and quiet strength, and every decision David made was for her future. On this particular morning, they were boarding a flight to New York. It wasn't a vacation, far from it. Emma had been accepted into a program for gifted students, a scholarship that could change her life. The interview was scheduled in Manhattan, and David had scraped together every dollar he could to make the trip possible. He couldn't afford to mess this up. The flight was packed, buzzing with conversations. In first class, a man sat surrounded by assistants and papers. His tailored suit, gold watch, and the way people whispered his name gave away his status. Richard Hall, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, was infamous for being ruthless in business and cold in his personal life. He had built empires but left behind broken relationships, including, as many knew, a strained bond with his only daughter, Grace. She was about Emma's age, but Richard rarely spoke about her, buried under endless board meetings and international deals. Halfway through the flight, as passengers settled into a rhythm of movies, naps and snacks, the silence was shattered by a thud. Richard Hall had collapsed, face pale, gasping for air. His assistants froze, unsure of what to do. A flight attendant screamed for a doctor. The cabin filled with panic. David didn't think twice. He had taken basic medical training back when he worked on construction sites. He pushed Emma gently into her seat and rushed forward. Kneeling beside the CEO, he checked his pulse, tilted his head back, and began chest compressions. His hands pressed rhythmically, his voice calm but firm as he instructed the staff to grab the emergency kit and oxygen mask. The wealthy man on the ground wasn't a CEO right now. He was just a human being clinging to life. The minutes stretched like hours. Passengers watched in tense silence as David worked tirelessly. Finally, Richard coughed, his chest rising with shaky breaths. Relief washed over the cabin. Flight attendants thanked David, but he only nodded, sweat dripping down his brow. Emma, peeking from her seat, looked at her father with wide, proud eyes. When the plane landed, paramedics rushed Richard to a hospital. Before he was taken away, his eyes locked on David and Emma. For the first time in years, gratitude softened his hardened expression. He asked for David's name. Over the next few days, as David focused on Emma's big interview, he thought little about the man he had saved. But fate wasn't done with them yet. Richard, recovering in the hospital, couldn't shake the image of the little girl watching her father save his life. He thought of his own daughter, Grace, and how absent he had been in her life. He had all the money in the world, yet here was a single father giving everything for his child's future. The contrast gnawed at him. A week later, David received an unexpected phone call. It was Richard Hall. At first, David thought it was a mistake, but Richard insisted on meeting. Nervously, David brought Emma with him. They met in a sleek Manhattan office, glass walls reflecting the skyline. Richard thanked him again, but then, to David's surprise, he turned his attention to Emma. He asked about her dreams, her studies, and her late mother. Emma spoke shyly at first, but grew more confident as Richard listened intently. For perhaps the first time in his life, Richard truly listened, not as a CEO, not as a businessman, but as a man yearning to understand the bond between a father and a daughter. When the meeting ended, Richard made a promise. He would personally sponsor Emma's education, ensuring she never had to struggle for opportunities. David was stunned. He had never asked for money, but Richard insisted it wasn't charity. It was gratitude, and perhaps redemption. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Richard began reaching out more to his own daughter, Grace. Inspired by David's devotion to Emma, he realized how much he had neglected the most important person in his life. Slowly, awkwardly, he tried to rebuild bridges. It wasn't easy. Grace carried years of hurt, But change began, small steps, phone calls, dinners, moments he had never given her before. For David and Emma, life blossomed. Emma thrived in her program, her bright mind shining. She often told her father that he was her hero, not because of the man he saved, but because of the way he never gave up on her. And for Richard, the collapse on that plane became the turning point he never expected. His empire no longer defined him. His daughter did. The story spread quietly at first, whispered among staff and passengers who had witnessed it, then picked up by news outlets. People were struck by the irony. A powerful CEO saved not by wealth or influence, but by a widowed construction worker who had almost nothing. And from that moment in the sky, two families' lives were forever changed. By the time Emma graduated years later, Richard and Grace were there in the audience, cheering alongside David, two fathers once strangers, now connected by fate, and the reminder that life's most precious riches are not built in boardrooms but in the bonds we fight for. So if you ever doubt whether one act of courage, one choice of compassion can ripple into something greater, remember this. A single dad's steady hands mid-flight not only saved a man's life, but mended a broken father's heart, altering his daughter's fate forever.